there is a taste difference. Just as good. So if you ever see it,
all right, everybody, welcome to the sour class. It's time to get started.
It won't overflow.
Started. I guess we're supposed to start at 7, but I gave everybody a little time to get here. So, but you guys had a few beers, so we're all good.
Gave me time to finish mine.
Yeah, there you go. All right.
I thought about buying 3.
Well, welcome.
Thank you.
So first, I'm going to. I'm definitely not like a master of brewing sour beers, but I have always brewed a lot of them. It's one of my favorite styles to brew and to drink. So take everything that I tell you guys with a grain of salt. I got most of my sources from a couple of books that we're going through the Tonsmeyer American Sour Beers. It's a great book. First thing I want to talk about is the difference between. Doesn't go on there. Okay. Between sour ales and wild ales, there is a difference. Here we go. Is there a way that I could have this so I can actually see the slide as well? It's not showing up on mine.
Hey dude, how's it going?
Pretty good. That could be.
Almost forgot this. If they were open, I could stop and wait. They have a class. And I went into Chick-fil-A to get my dinner. Because I haven't eaten. I have now. But. So, next
Well, this is Chick-fil-A.
next meeting.
Yeah, how do you think that up, man?
What do you mean? Yeah. Usually I just throw that all inside the
Flavor out.
That's usually the presenter view.
Yeah, you sure this is
Yeah.
No, we can figure it out. Oh,
It's not super.
I got you, Ruben.
Boom. All right. Cool.
One's mine, one's Ruben.
There we go. All right. So talking about sour beers, we're going to talk about the actual difference between sour and wild beers. A lot of people assume that wild beers are actually sour, but there's some characteristics of each one. Sour beers are actually noticeably sour. The acidic character should be dominant. They might or might not be funky. Not all sour beers are funky. Not all funky beers or wild beers are sour. So it kind of just depends on the style. Sour beers actually contain lactic acid brewing bacteria, which I'll be calling LABS, L-A-B-S, in the rest of the presentation. But they also have clean yeasts as well, or can have clean yeasts, such as the Goza or the Berliner Weisse. Like there's no wild yeast in the Berliner Weisse or Goza like there is typically in a lot of other mixed fermentation sours. So wild yeast or wild beers are characterized as actually having usually Brettanomyces or some wild yeast is the characteristic of the flavor that they produce, and they produce a lot of interesting kind of funky flavors like pineapple, hay, that barnyard kind of funk flavor. Some produce cherry. Some also produce some not so good flavors like kind of an acrid roasted plastic smell. Roasty plastic smell. Yeah. That's usually a contamination if that happens in your beer. So the main lactic acid producing bacteria that we have are Lactobacillus and Pediococcus. So Lactobacillus can produce lactic acid very quickly, within days or hours sometimes, whereas Pediococcus can take weeks or months, usually months. There's almost no style, at least common style, that uses Pediococcus as the sole souring bacteria. Most of them also have Lactobacillus or Brettanomyces in them. We're going to go through some tasting, some beers. The first beer that you guys have is our Jolly Quencher, which is a Goza. So that is what I would call a clean sour beer. So you guys go ahead and give that a taste.
Danny, can you mix both Lactobacillus and Pediococcus with
Yep.
the same sour?
Absolutely, yeah. We'll get a little bit more into that in a few slides. Most sour beers that have one also have the other, as well as the other yeasts as well, Brettanomyces and Saccharomyces. So So wild ales usually also, as I said, have Brettanomyces, which is a species of yeast, not a bacteria. A lot of people always assume bread is a bacteria. It is actually a genus of yeast. Brett can also produce acid. It can produce acetic acid in the presence of oxygen. There's really only one style in which that's appropriate or common, and that's either a Flanders Red or an Oud Bruin, much more so in a Flanders Red. And there's a list of some of the typical funky flavors that are associated with Brett. Tropical fruit, like pineapple. There's some strains like Brett C, Brett Glycinii, which is actually it's actually an English strain. It's originally observed in London the first time, or discovered. Produces a lot of pineapple flavor. That's my favorite strain to use for tropical sour beers. Cherry, Brett Lambicus produces a lot of cherry flavor. I've made a beer that was almost all Brett Lambicus used in primary, and it tasted almost identical to like a cherry fruit beer. Like I could hand it to somebody, tell them there was cherry in it, and they would believe it, but there's actually no fruit in that beer at all. Pear, and then grassy kind of horse blanket, musty and smoky flavors as well. There's all kinds of different strains of Brettanomyces that are available from a bunch of different suppliers. East Coast Yeast, Omega, Yeast, and of course White Labs. They have a few.
Smoky flavor?
Yeah, some, what is it? Animalis. I can't remember which strain, but yeah, smoky can be a good or bad flavor depending on what you're making and if you actually want it in there. So the first, really got to talk about the four main things in sour beers: the yeast and the bugs. So Saccharomyces is regular brewer's yeast. You guys are all very familiar with this particular strain or particular genus. Any strain can be used to produce a sour beer. Belgian yeasts are most common out of tradition and geographically speaking. Usually it's the Belgians that produce the most sour beers. And they can add some of their fruity and complex esters and phenols can add some complexity to your sour beers as well. We use almost exclusively USO5 for all of ours, which is just the Chico strain, because it's nice and neutral. It gives me like a nice base that I can just kind of add what I want to. It's a very strong, predictable yeast, and it almost never produces any off flavors. So, and it's cheap. What's up?
You add it dry, or you make it starter with?
I usually just pitch it dry. Yeah, just open the pack and dump it in. That's because I'm usually doing 5-barrel batches. We get like 10-barrel pitches, so I tend to overpitch most of the time. So even if dry pitching just kills off half my yeast, it's fine. A lot of breweries use whatever yeast they have lying around. If they have like a strain that they're going to pull from something else, and if they're either going to either not use it or just dump it down the drain, they'll save it and use it for a sour beer. When you are picking your strains, you want to remember not to pick something that's like super highly attenuative, because it'll just consume all the sugars and all the dextrins. You want to leave something behind for your bacteria to consume. English strains tend to also work really, really well for that, because they, if you ferment them warm, they get kind of phenolic and estery, and they're not very highly attenuated, so they work well for that. Let's see, I'm trying to figure out when would be the best time to break out the other beers. Probably at the end. Brettanomyces is the other one of the next yeasts that are pretty much always associated with either sour beer or wild beer. And as I said before, it is actually a genus of yeast. It is not a bacteria. Its primary role is to ferment dextrins and create a lot of those funky or complex fruity aromas and flavors that are associated with sour beers and funky beers. Brett is capable of breaking down a lot more longer chain sugars and bigger, more unusual sugars than Saccharomyces can. They can even break down cellulose, which is essentially wood.
Wood in your barrel.
Yeah. You can eat the wood in your barrel and live there. It's associated with having flavors such as pineapple, pear, apple, cherry, like I said before. Wild Brett strains can also have a lot of nasty off flavors, like I said, like a dreaded fecal, or one time I had an infection that I swear smelled just like throw up.
I had over at Lambic that smelled like throw up, tastes like throw up as well too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm surprised they serve that.
Yep. That was one of the higher specialty beers. So
Yeah. I'll get into that a little bit later. Just because it's sour doesn't mean it's good. There are definitely off flavors that are associated with sour beers.
But it can still be sold. Right?
Yeah.
yeah.
It's caused by acetobacter. Yeah, it's ferulic acid.
Yes.
Yeah.
No.
Isobutyric acid.
Butyric acid.
Yeah.
Butyric acid, yeah.
Brettanomyces, as I said, can also produce acetic acid in the presence of oxygen, so acetic acid is a lot more of an intense acidity. It's like vinegary, as opposed to like a softer lactic acid flavor. And as I said before, that's really atypical in most sour beers, except for the Flanders Red style.
On the Flanders Red, you're getting the oxygen through, it's usually wood age, you're getting oxygen through the barrel.
Exactly. That's almost an exact line in my next slide, Ed. Thanks. What the hell was that?
That's just really
Is that Quagmire?
Yeah.
Okay. So Brett has a much longer life cycle than, or reproduction cycle than Saccharomyces. It can take up to between 7 to 10 days for Brett to really reproduce and actually to go through its complete cycle. Because of that, it takes a lot longer to kind of exert its character on the finished beer. The exception to that is if you do a all Brett beer, like if you use Brett as your primary yeast, like you just pitch Brett into a beer. In that case, it can produce pretty quickly and also at warmer temperatures. But you have to make a big, huge starter, usually like a stepped-up starter. But some of my most interesting beers have been all Brett beers. I don't really go into them in this presentation just because it's only supposed to be an hour long, and I could make this presentation 3 hours easily. But we can talk about that more later after the presentation if you guys want to. So Brett is able to absorb nutrients from autolysis, which is the death of other yeast strains. So if you're making a sour beer and you want it to have more of a Brett character, just leave it in primary. Just never transfer it off the yeast. And then as the Saccharomyces dies, the Brett will pick up those nutrients that are normally, that can cause off flavors normally in a beer, and they can turn them into phenols and esters and make it more complex. No question?
Cannibal.
Yeah, exactly. And there's really only one style that is typically brewed this way, and that's the Lambic. We'll get in a little bit later exactly how Lambic is made, but the primary fermentation and almost the majority of all of its aging is done in barrels. And there you go.
Is there
Traditionally
any
done with
control
Lambic.
to that?
I'm sorry?
Is there any control in that?
What do you mean? Like,
As far as replication of...
nope. And I'll get into that a little bit also when we start talking about specific styles. Lambic is really, a lot of the art form that goes into Lambic is blending. Just tasting the barrels and then blending them together to either get like a consistent beer or to get something that's truly unique and remarkable. So Lactobacillus is actually the first true bacteria that we're going to talk to. So for most sour beers, there's two yeasts and two bacteria. Lacto is the first true bacteria. It's capable of quickly producing lactic acid, like I said, in a matter of days or even hours. When I do my Kettle Sours here, I brew them on Friday. We pitch the lacto, and when I come in Monday morning, it's done. It's ready to go. So I let it go for about 48 hours. It is easily inhibited by hops. That's actually one of the main reasons why we add hops to beers, is to inhibit the souring activity of lactobacillus. Because in most other beers, clean beers, it is considered a contaminant. So,
Danny, before you throw lactobacillus, do you use anything to drop pH?
I do. Yeah, I'll get into that later. I'm going to go through like my specific kettle souring method.
Okay.
And actually, I have a little flyer, a little handout for you guys too. So. It has a very high temperature range, anywhere from about 100 to 120 for most strains. Will produce lactic acid bacteria or lactic acid. Some strains are capable of souring at room temp. The one that we use here is the Omega blend. It's a blend of Lactobacillus plantarum and that's a Breccia. Maybe it is. Can't remember now. But one's activated at a higher temperature. The other one will produce lactic acid at room temp. So it's consistent. It's readily available. It's not too expensive. That's one of the main reasons why we use it. And I highly recommend it to you guys too if you guys want to do kettle sours at home. Omega Lacto blend. And you can keep using it over and over again over multiple generations as well. And yeah, like I said, that's what I use for mine.
So out of curiosity for that Omega, now, are you finding that with the room temp portion of it, is it like exothermic, is it generating heat to try and get up at all?
No.
Nope. Okay.
No, usually not. I mean, so like what I do is I knock out at about 120 degrees, and I fill that kettle all the way up almost. So it's like it's just such a big unit of thermal mass that it doesn't really cool that much.
Okay.
Like I'll come in Monday morning, I'll put my hand on it, and it's still warm. Not hot, but it's definitely still warm.
Okay.
So you don't put a temperature control on it during the weekend?
I don't have to do that, just because, like I said, it's so big. If you guys have the capability of doing that, that's great. But you can make good sour beer or kettle sour beers without doing that. And that's another reason why that blend is, I think, so beneficial, because it will sour at room temp.
It doesn't sour as much, I don't think.
I mean, it's not going to get super, super sour, but it would still be in the range that I would consider it a sour beer, like it goes over Berliner Weisse.
Yeah.
It all depends on what you want. I mean, if you really wanted to get super sour, you could always dose it on the back end with lactic acid, but I don't recommend doing that. So Pediococcus is the second true bacteria that we will talk about. It produces lactic acid much more slowly, but it is capable of getting much more sour to a much lower pH than lactic acid, or than Lactobacillus. It can take anywhere from months to years, depending on how you have created your wort. So you can sour almost any beer, depending on how you do it and how much time you're willing to invest in it. I've had sour IPAs, I've made sour IPAs. You guys have probably tried them. Remember the sour bind? That was actually a Kettle Sour IPA, but we'll get a little bit more into that later. Pediococcus is also more hop resistant than Lactobacillus, so it will eventually get there, but it could take years. So it really just depends. The reason why most sour beers are not used primarily with just Pediococcus is because Pedio can also produce a lot of diacetyl, and unlike Brettanomyces or Saccharomyces, it won't break it down. So like most beers will produce diacetyl just during normal fermentation, but then you after conditioning it breaks it down and it gets rid of it, at least to a level that you can't detect it. Pedio will produce it and it doesn't break it down at all. So that's why anytime you're going to use Pedio, you should also pitch Brettanomyces, because Brett definitely scavenges diacetyl and turns it into more fruity esters and flavors. So now we're going to get in some of the traditional styles of sour beers. And there's certain styles that are geographically associated with certain areas. So Belgium and France, there's the Flemish and Flanders ales, and especially Lambic, or Lambic, as it's supposedly traditionally pronounced. So Germany is associated with Berliner Weisse and Gose, and also Lichtenheiner, but I don't really go into Lichtenheiner in this presentation. England has their old ales. A lot of old ales do have like a Brett character to them. And then the United States of America, we are non-traditional sour beer brewers. We do unusual styles: sour IPAs, Brett IPAs, Brett pale ales, pastry sours. All this stuff that's all the rage now, brewed almost nowhere else in the world except for right here in the good old US of A. They aren't ready for it.
No. Right. No ketchup.
Yeah, okay. American brewers are actually a commodity right now.
They're stubborn old mules. That's what.
Yeah. So the first one is the Flemish Red, Flanders Red Ale. It's a red ale that is aged in oak barrels traditionally, fermented with all of the traditional bugs and yeast that I was talking about before, lacto, Brett, Pedio, and sherry flora, which is actually kind of unique. A lot of the sherry aspect comes from the barrels. They're more malty, and it's basically a red ale with wild characteristics and sour characteristics. But because they're almost aged completely in barrels, they have an acetic acid character to them, which comes from the permeation of oxygen into the barrels. And now I actually have some Flanders Red for us to drink. So did you guys finish off your samples?
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
All right.
What,
Let me grab these.
what do you mean SS tank? Is that where you first?
Stainless steel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we think
Yeah, it's
that's
gonna be still around.
It's fermented
That beer.
Hold on just a second.
There, it's not, no?
Maybe initially.
Some are probably
I mean,
maybe.
the sherry has somehow, right?
Yeah.
It goes in barrels, isn't it?
I think so, yeah.
Traditionally, they are still aged in some barrels. No, though the fruiters is the barrel. No, because they're still a big tall barrel.
Still also.
Yeah, so that's still your brewers. So they probably do primary in the stainless steel, and then they're aged in the fruiters. So that way you get that character of the wood, the oxygen. So it gets oxidized, so you get that other balance of flavors.
It seems small.
Yes, I could make a sour.
It seems like it's a really small opening.
It took me a while to get used to that vinegar flavor.
Yeah.
It's
Oh,
just done well.
A year from now.
Quite lovely.
that's so true.
That
Though.
one's going to be kept because I'm going to have a second one coming along.
Can no longer open
You
bottles.
never want to think about it. No. I've had one or two that are like, Anyway.
Now, are they Flanders Red usually soured, or is that coming from the bread? No, it's
So it's usually a pitch of all of the bugs and yeasts.
There's one I know that I had a while ago. I thought it was a stick,
Bless you.
but they would have flavors. They'd have like 4 different kinds, and they're all Flanders Reds with flavors to them.
I mean, that's not traditional, but that doesn't mean it's a bad thing. I'm sure those are interesting.
This still doesn't.
Who cares about tradition?
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, I had a goza with lime and graham cracker in it when I was young.
Yeah.
That was delicious.
It tasted like a key lime
But it's
pie.
like key lime.
It was beautiful.
Yeah, so like a lot of these are just
I
general
figured it was
rules
one of
about
our
the styles. But if you can find creative ways to break them,
So fucking good.
then you can make delicious beer.
Yeah.
I had
It all depends on what you're going for.
And then I'm like, no, how did that happen? I don't know. Does that work? I want to know.
I wanted to see if they would email. I don't know if they did, but I haven't.
Chris Chubb and I,
Danny, where's the oxidation
we
happen?
read the list.
In the barrel.
Man, this could really
Yeah, barrels are porous.
really good.
They allow oxygen
You
in.
could taste the custard in it, which was the crazy thing. Yes.
Yeah, it happens in the
I was
barrel.
blown away by this
And
beer.
there's like we'll get to when we get to Ode Bruins, I'll talk about a little bit more about the difference between those.
I was like,
It's more than just the malt; it's also
that
how
was
it's
blowing
aged.
my mind.
They must have just like put pie.
That's what I'm thinking. It's like, yo, mom, you making some pie tonight? It's like, okay, cool, just dump that in.
They threw a key lime pie in the fermenter and then pitched.
So it was distilled.
It was crazy.
So happy.
It blew my mind. I was happy and jealous at the same
Two
time.
brothers too.
I don't know. I don't know who did it. I'd love to find out who did that and talk to them and find out how they did it.
They get some stuff different.
I did do
You
some
might
like
see like
that.
a dozen.
Somebody
but you don't
doing
get
that. Reverse engineered the flavor.
It's surprising they're out of stock right now at nearby.
That you could theoretically like put it
Oh, so it wasn't flavored. They said cheese.
They gave us next.
97. It was really freaking good. I just got one bottle. Thank you, sir.
Certain type of grains that'll
So good.
Vinegar, huh?
yeah.
Yeah, but the grains
That was it.
Let's see what these slackers are working on here. It's old school.
Yeah. So
Smells like vinegar, huh?
a little bit. Yeah.
Which is
Not a lot.
awesome.
I got excited when I was
That's
Good, man. That's
So this is one of the few beers where that kind of vinegary quality is expected and acceptable. This is the Duchess de Bourguignon, which is a very classic Flanders Red Ale.
3% malted barley.
Now, if you guys notice, take a sip. It's a little sweeter than a lot of other sour
yeah.
beers,
They messed
but
up.
it does have that sour quality to it.
It's really like light body as well, too.
Yeah.
This one will probably get more
It's like
sour.
$18.
Yeah.
Judging by the sweetness, this one will probably get
I like this
sour
beer a lot.
with age.
This beer also does have a lot of cherry character to it,
Yeah.
and as far as I know, that comes from the Contamination. It's not from actual cherries.
No, they wouldn't add. Because that would
But
be a fruit
you're saying there actually is a cherry version?
Yes, because I haven't had that one. I found it at a bottle shop and it was like chocolate covered cherry.
That sounds delicious.
Where did you get that then?
I paid like
Total wine.
$8 for a bottle.
Yeah,
A cordial.
I would love to try that. Or make that. It sounds amazing. I've made one of these before myself. I made it. Funny you should ask. I put it in secondary, and then my child was born, and I haven't had a chance to try it since. I'm actually giving them to Jen, and Jen is going to bottle them all up for me, and she gets to keep almost as much as she wants.
You can enter some of those.
Yeah.
For us.
They've been sitting in secondary for like a year and a half. Yeah.
That's how long my Flanders
You
Red.
won't be able to make that again.
I mean, I can. I got the recipe still.
Next son.
I was surprised that a Berliner Weiss that sat in secondary for 6
Yeah.
months was still.
She'd actually hold on to a bottle of that until she's 21. Give it to her for her birthday.
Yeah, that's a good idea. I do want to do. I want to make her a barley wine. Like ages.
Happy birthday, hon.
Yeah. So, but like, you get a lot of the funkiness out of this beer. So a lot of the typical Bred character. How many of you guys have ever had a beer with Brettanomyces in it? Probably not very many of you. Really? Okay. So it's a lot of that complexity that's going on in there. Like you get the cherry.
A little bit of tobacco.
I couldn't taste it. Can I try it again?
I think we have more back.
What's the percentage on it actually?
That's a good question.
6%.
Yeah. It's relatively light.
Is it possible to get like a clean flavor out of bread? Like you mentioned, like Bred C has pineapple. Is that going to taste like a lacto sour with pineapple, or is it still going to have that characteristic like bread, kind of funky murkiness?
So the one I made a Bret Pale Ale that I then dry hopped with Nelson.
Okay.
And it was fantastic. It was one of my first gold medals that I got in a competition. It was like really intensely tropical, but it did still have kind of like a bready character to it. I entered it as a Bret beer. I forget which category that is. There's one for all Bret, and it did very well. But that was a great beer. That was all Bret C.
Okay.
Yeah.
But it still has that characteristic where you couldn't just like do like a clean beer,
Yeah.
a clean sour with pineapple and get a similar thing.
I wouldn't call it clean. It still definitely had a little bit of funk to it,
Okay.
but it was good. It was.
Now you're making me question what bread I use. I use Bret B.
Brooks is a good one too. That one's a lot more traditional. That one's a lot more like the hay kind of horse blanket flavor. A lot of sour beers that you have many different strains of bread in them. Like I don't know how many are in this one. This one, just by the flavor, I would imagine is probably primarily Lambicus, just because of that cherry flavor. But I wouldn't be surprised at all if there were a bunch of other strains in there as well.
Are usually, like, say for Flanders Red, are a little bit higher carbonated than normal?
I don't remember much about the carbonation level. We could look it up. I just can't think of it off the top of my head. But so, as Rubens was picking up, you do get. It does have although this beer is relatively sweet, I get a bit of like a vinegary flavor from it, and that's because of how the way it's made. It comes from oxidation in the barrel when the beer is produced. And this is one of pretty much the only style in which that is traditional or acceptable.
Oxidation, you can ferment in that.
My little clicker, guys.
We'll see what we have in a year.
Here it is. Unfortunately, I couldn't find one of these for us to actually taste, but this is the next one is the Ode Brune, the Flanders Ode Brune.
I have some.
Cool.
Made by Petrus.
Do you have any with you?
No, you didn't tell me. They sell Petrus at the Total Wine.
Yeah, I just couldn't find any over here.
It's an old brew.
So this one is also has a full complement of yeast and bacteria, but it has a darker malt character. So this is essentially Ode Brune is essentially a brown ale that has been soured, but it does have a lighter character than the Flanders Red does. The difference between these is that Flanders Reds, like I said before, the majority of their fermentation is done in barrels, and then they're aged in barrels to get that oxidation, whereas Ode Brunes are mostly aged in stainless steel tanks to kind of prevent that from happening. So that's the second most traditional style to come out of Belgium. The last one is, of course, Lambic. Lambic is its own unique thing. There is no other beer on earth that's anywhere really like it, I would say. I couldn't. They had Lindemans over there, but I feel like most of you guys have had Lindemans. It's like really, really sweet, and I feel like it's not really a true representation of what a decent Lambic is. It's not bad. I still like to drink it, but
It's delicious.
You just mix it with
It's sweet.
St. Bernard swells.
yeah, that's They call it a blushing monk.
Golden monk.
Yeah. So Lambics are really unique. They are spontaneously fermented. They're aged for at least a year. A lot of times with fruit, not always with fruit, and then you can create different versions of them by blending them in different ways. Unblended is anywhere from 6 months to a year old, which is then served still. I had some of that actually at Cantillon in Brussels, which was pretty awesome. It was really unique. I remember when I was there, they said that it's almost like the wine quality of the grain. It's like a wine distillation of the grain, and it was a lot more I don't know what you call it. A lot more wine-like than a traditional beer would be. Goose is a blend of lambics. It's usually a 1, 2, and 3-year-old lambic that's then blended together and then aged for another year. So if you guys ever see gooses around in the bottle shops, if you can afford them, I would pick one up. They're some of the most complex beers I've ever tasted, and you can get a hold of. They're good stuff.
Not cheap.
What do they call them?
They're called just goose usually, yeah. There's a bunch of different variations. I've never seen one that had fruit in it. Usually the fruited ones are like a single, like a 1-year-old that's blended or something like that. But the fruit lambics, the traditional ones are sour cherry, raspberry, peach, pear, blackcurrant, and apricot. And usually they're, whenever you see them bottled, they're called by their traditional French or German name. So Kriek, Frambois, Pêche, Cassis, and Abricotier.
Is New Belgium
That's
made
terrible.
You said apricotier?
Yeah, Abricotier.
Apricotier?
It's like with a B, A-B, Abricotier.
It's like $20.
I've never really had the apricot one or the cassis one. Those ones are hard to find, the black currant. Yeah. The frambois, the peach, and the Kriek are very good. I do have some Cantillon, but I didn't have enough for everybody, and I'm saving that one for our
Yeah, no, that's understood.
I'm sorry?
If you bought it, you gotta share it. So you have Frambois in there now? I can't be honest. Back all my drink.
Yeah.
Good.
I did bring a bottle of Cantillon for our grand opening. Me and Jeremy, we all sat around and drank it. Been saving that beer for a while.
Yes.
Yeah.
The first one was good though?
Yes, it was delicious. So spontaneous fermentation is exactly kind of what it sounds like. Wort is produced as normal, and then it's put into a cool ship. I'll show you guys a picture of a cool ship in a couple seconds. Cool ship to cool down. A cool ship is essentially, besides having a cool name, cool ship is terrible. It's a vessel that exposes the wort to a large amount of air. So they usually have a lot of surface area, and they're relatively shallow.
Like a swimming pool.
And then they're just left to expose to. Here, I'll show you the picture.
Cookie sheet.
This is the actual one at Cantillon. I took this picture myself when I went there.
That's what that was?
Yeah.
I thought that was part of the grain up top of the
grand
attic.
piano.
Yep, that is the cool ship. So
The first floor, it gets
usually made out of copper.
It's a kiddie pool.
As I said, yeah, it's like a giant kiddie pool.
That's what
Like
it looks like.
huge surface area, not very deep, and you can see on the side the louvers. That's how they control the air coming in and out, airflow. Yeah, they just have them on open on the other side. Everybody has this kind of like idyllic view of Cantillon, like kind of imagine it in like the country or the mountainside. No, it's right in the center of downtown Brussels.
you could pass it by.
A lot of industrial.
Yeah, there's like construction
Yeah.
going around
It's a
everywhere.
warehouse.
The air is like real nasty. And
Yeah.
It's like opening it up to.
Yeah,
So this produced the beer that you enjoyed very much.
that's right. Yep.
Polluted beer.
That is just
Put in your attic.
So it's really it's whatever wild yeast is floating around in the air. And you can do it at home too. You don't actually have to have a big cool ship like that. I helped one of my friends make one. We essentially just made wort, knocked it out. It's best to do it when it's cooler outside because when it's really hot like this, there tends to be a lot of lactic acid bacteria in the air, and that kind of just can dominate the beer and
What do
it'll
you do
sour
with
too
the
quickly.
roach shit?
The roach shit?
Yeah.
Oh, that's part of the terroir.
The roaches.
Yeah,
The roaches that come in there.
yeah it's a natural flavor profile of the beer.
That's part of the beer.
Just like, that's the same thing you do with the flies while you're.
Just don't tell anybody.
Yeah, exactly.
That's why they blend it.
Yeah, that's why it's blended. That all floats to the bottom. You rack it off.
The flies are around.
It's like the what's the coffee they sell from?
Big cloth.
Oh, Cope Luwak.
Yeah, it's the Cope Lua beer. Roach shit. It's a animal shit.
So they make a large amount of wort. They put it in the cool ship, and then it goes straight into barrels. And primary fermentation is done in the barrel, and it's pretty much the only type of beer in which that it's produced that way. So a lot of the key to great lambic is actually blending the different barrels to kind of achieve what you want. I should have put more pictures of Cantillon in here because they had one room that was just barrels. Yeah, it's pretty neat. Have you guys ever been to Cantillon?
That's it.
It's pretty neat. If you get a chance, highly recommend it.
Was there any issues when you see? Because I saw at one point, I don't know if they had a plexiglass on the front of it.
Yeah, there was
where it
one
was
that had a bump.
seeping out of
Yeah.
the barrel itself. That's still okay per se.
Yeah, I mean, so it undergoes primary fermentation, so it hits like high krausen in the barrel.
So they never take it to a secondary in that.
No, that's what I was saying before. So like a lot of the Brett character comes from the yeast, like the other yeast, as it italicizes and dies. So you, to get that like intense kind of Brett character, the entire life cycle of the beer is done in the barrel until it's taken out for blending or mixing with fruit.
Makes so much sense.
But it becomes lambic in the barrel.
So do they?
Do they move it into the barrel?
That explains the.
Into the barrel, right after. So they produce the wort. It goes into a cool ship. The reason why it's called a cool ship is because that's where they cool the beer. They pump up boiling wort in there. Once it cools down to whatever temperature they want, I don't know exactly how many days it stays in the cool ship. I'd imagine a day or two.
What you showed,
Yeah.
what you showed in that photo was a cool ship.
Yep, that was a cool ship. This one's empty.
So room temp.
Yeah, I would imagine once it reaches room temp, it goes into the barrels and then they just let it
Where
ride.
they mill the grape.
Huh?
That's what
I was there in the summertime, so it was probably in like the
That's an attic. So
yeah. It was pretty warm. It was probably in the high 70s, low 80s.
It's been family generated. Like
Though they don't brew year round, and I think it's because they're primarily a Lambic producer. So I think they produce most of their wort and they do most of their fermentation during the fall and the winter, and then the other part of the year is blending and bottling.
it's so cool though.
I've heard they had to adjust their brewing season to the warm, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't.
Now, how many barrels is that?
I don't know. I couldn't.
It doesn't look like.
So when you go to Cantillon, it's like a guided tour. They give you this little pamphlet, and you just kind of walk through. And it didn't have a lot of the kind of
Are you
technical
supposed to throw
aspects.
coins in there too to help with fermentation?
Huh?
You're supposed to throw coins in there to help with
Yeah.
fermentation.
So from the barrel perspective, since Brett kind of eats silos as well too, are the barrels basically one and done, or they were trying to reuse the barrels?
So a lot of people reuse barrels. There's one method called the Salera Method, which I think is really, really interesting. I don't really go to it very much in the slides, but I can kind of explain it to you guys.
You actually have an article on the Brewer's Anonymous website about.
Oh yeah, that's right. I wrote one.
Check it out.
Yeah, I wrote an article about it. It's probably like 2 years ago now, right? This was a while ago. Basically, what you do is you produce your wort, you fill the barrel. It doesn't necessarily, to do the Salera, it doesn't necessarily have to do completely primary fermentation in the barrel, but you want to pitch your bugs in the barrel because the Brett and a lot of the other bacteria will survive in the barrel and will stay there. So then what you would do is that you would pull off about half of your beer, and then you could do whatever you want in the back end. You could fruit it, you could dry hop it, you could do whatever, and then you brew more wort and you just refill the barrel. So you kind of take some out, do what you want with it, top it up, and then since there's already live bugs and bacteria and stuff in there, it just kind of keeps doing its thing. That's actually a project I would love for us to do if I can get enough takers to do it. The hard part for that though is finding a place to keep the barrel at a reasonable humidity and temperature. So
Nick Jameson said that he would be willing to do that.
would he?
He already had all that stuff going around his house anyways.
Sweet. So
What
yeah,
temp-
we
what
should work something
temperature
out.
do you need it at?
You just don't want it to get too hot, so you want it to stay around room temp. We can't do one here because Jeremy's paranoid, rightly so, about Brett.
Actually, I think even as a 5-gallon barrel, if I'm not mistaken, ready to go.
Yeah. So I mean, we have a couple barrels where we can easily get a hold of. Like, I want to do one that the whole club could do, like a couple of like 55-gallon barrels. That way, everybody, or at least a few people, can pull off like 5 gallons. Everybody could like group brew the same recipe, produce and fill the barrel initially, and then a certain time of year we all get together, take the beer out, rebrew it again, fill the barrel up. I think it'd be a cool group brew project.
Is the KMF tank at Sam Adams essentially just a Salera?
I think so. Or is it a foeder?
It's like a great big, huge barrel.
Probably. It sounds like a foeder.
Like the size of the walk-in.
Yeah. That's essentially what foeders are. They're like Salera. And like what a lot of people do is they'll produce like one particular style. Like you'll have like a golden one, which is like usually just Pilsner malt and wheat or something like that. It's like a more neutral base. Then you'll have like a red one, so you could produce something like a Flanders Red if you wanted to, with a little bit more malt character. And then you could have one that's darker, like an Old Bruin one, or even something that's like a light porter. And then, you could do whatever flavorings you want on the back end. On the darker one, you could add darker fruit, like raspberries or blackberries. The more neutral one, you could do anything you want with it. And you could hop it at the end like an IPA if you wanted to. So, sky's the limit. But yeah, that's something I would like to work on if you guys are interested sometime in the future.
I'm not opposed to it.
Sweet. So, the next classical beers we'll talk about are Berliner Weisse and Goza. Probably should have waited for the Goza before, but I wanted to start you guys off with some sour beer. So these are geographically unique to two cities. The Berliner Weisse is, of course, from Berlin, and the Goza is from Leipzig, Germany. They are characterized as being low in alcohol. Like the real traditional ones are like anywhere from like 3 to 4%, 2 to 4%. We brew Imperial Berliners and Gozas here at RockPit Brewing.
Yay!
Ours are all at least 5%.
Yay!
Which is, is like normal gravity for a beer. Yeah. In Berlin, they usually they'll brew just like a traditional base, and then you can flavor it in your glass with syrups, which can be fun to do here. Travis did one of those at the Smash Fest last year. He had jelly beans, so he brewed like a Berliner Weisse sour, and then he diluted jelly beans to make a bunch of different syrups.
Nice.
And that was kind of a cool thing to do. Traditional flavors are like raspberry woodruff, which is like a kind of like an herbaceous green syrup. I don't really know. Woodruff is a plant. I don't know really how else to describe the flavor. It's definitely very floral and herbaceous. Lemon is another traditional one. I want to do the lime one. I love lime. But that would be a fun one to do. And Goza is basically a variation of Berliner Weisse. It's very similar. It's the same beer, but it has coriander and salt added to it. So if you guys do ever brew a sour beer and it gets a little too sour, one of the ways that you can kind of counteract the sourness a little bit, kind of round it out, is by adding salt to it.
It's usually you add sugar.
Yeah, sugar will ferment out again. You don't want to do that.
Cooking.
You guys got any questions so far? Any other questions? No? Steve is going to hand you guys out some. Let's do the other one this time, the Halakiki.
Didn't you make a dill pickle beer?
I did make a dill pickle beer one time.
It was really good.
Yeah, you judged it.
I judged it,
Yeah,
yes.
and you pushed it through to the second round, or
push
tried
it
to,
through.
right?
I did.
I appreciate
went to
it.
the second round.
Yeah, I made a. That was a Goza. It was a. It was kind of like a pickleback. It didn't have the whiskey in it. It was based on a cocktail that I had in a bar in Savannah, Georgia, called Bit of a Pickle. I made my normal Goza base, and I added lemon juice, lemon zest, gin-soaked oak chips, black pepper, red peppercorns, dill, and of course cucumber.
Dill seed or dill?
And it
Dill, coriander.
tasted like a dill pickle, but it was good.
Yeah. No, actually, I did that. I did the dill plant
The
too.
dill plant.
Was that a kettle sour?
That was a kettle sour, yeah.
Because I got the last bottle.
You still have it?
No, they
Yeah.
didn't make it to the best of show round.
Oh, that's right, yeah.
And I drank it a couple months later. It was really, really sour.
Yeah, I mean, I added a lot of like lemon juice and stuff to it as well.
But 2 months after I judged it, it was really sour, almost to the point of being undrinkable.
Yeah. Yeah, that one I think I still have like a couple more bottles of it. It'd be interesting to try it now. I was looking for sour beers to give to you guys, my own collection, but I couldn't find anything that hadn't been
I've got a
packaged
barley wine
other than
that's a
those.
year old. It might be sour by now.
Yeah. But yeah, that was another interesting Goza that I did.
I forgot about that.
No.
So with the Berliner Weisses and the Gozas, they actually had to make an exception to the Reinheitsgebot, the German beer purity law, for those beers to exist. They're traditionally made using just Saccharomyces and Lactobacillus. So these ones don't have Pediococcus in them. Brett is actually considered acceptable to the style, although it is not very common at all. I've never made one with Brett. If anybody in town has made one, it's probably, I would say, Hourglass. They do a nice mix of traditional and non-traditional sours. The yeast can be co-pitched or it can be kettle soured. Now that we've gotten into the brew house here, we're worried about contaminating all of our large-scale equipment, so we're kettle souring everything. But a lot of the sours that we used to make in the shop, those were just co-pitched. And then we had like a separate set of sour equipment.
Yep. A lot of stuff with red tape on it.
Yeah. Kettle souring is nice if you guys do want to make sour beers and are worrying about infecting your equipment. Some people are not, like Kettle.
Equipment as in just
sour.
fermentation, right?
Huh?
Just the
It's
fermentation.
everything on the cold side. So on the hot side, it doesn't matter. Like your kettle or mash tun, none of that stuff is going to get sour. It would be everything after you pitched your bugs and your yeast. So your racking cane, your tubing, your bottling bucket,
My Berliner Weiss
kegs.
video is a fermenter, the fermenter is a sour.
Yeah. So now I'm going to get into kettle souring. I have a one more.
I've got one.
So that is the halakahiki. That is a basically it's a pina colada, but it's a lot more dominant by the pineapple. Berliner. Yeah, I'm just gonna take one and pass it.
How many pineapples do you use?
We use pineapple juice for that one.
How much?
I can't remember off the top of my head. We did a 5-barrel batch. It was
That's proprietary.
it's a trade secret.
Yeah, don't say I can't remember,
Any
say that's
difference
proprietary.
using the juice versus fresh?
It means the same thing, it just,
That's what I've noticed. I get the same flavor.
Alright. I'm not cutting anymore. I'm not blending any more pineapple.
Yeah. There's a lot more processing. Than fresh pineapple.
Yeah.
Damn it, we gotta take a test.
I got the
Come on, man.
oh, that's good.
Getting proprietary secrets right here.
Yeah. I mean,
that would be the same as putting pineapple.
this is general information. I feel like this is really easy to find.
This is what?
Which is no.
What is this?
I was just talking about my Kettle Sour method. My Kettle Sour method isn't anything revolutionarily different than anybody else's.
So are you gonna make the hard water again?
Yep, it's already in the tank.
Gotcha.
That's a cheap one to make.
Yes, it is.
Oh yeah, sugar water.
Short brew day. Yeah. So the primary reason for kettle souring a beer, what you're doing is you're using lactic acid bacteria to create an environment that is basically perfect for the lactobacillus to produce lactic acid. There's, like I said before, there's a bunch of different strains of lacto. The best one is whatever works for you. If you're able to, if you want a really, really sour beer and you're able to hold your kettle at a specific temperature, I would use a different strain versus than if I was going for something that was just more roundly tart and kind of more neutral. Temp is very important, like I said. You should be able to hold a temperature anywhere from 95 to 120 degrees. But there are some strains that will sour at room temp, like the Plantarum. So after acidification, that doesn't make sense. I thought I found all the typos. The wort is then boiled and neutralized to kill the lactic acid bacteria so that it doesn't contaminate any of your other equipment. From then, you can just hop it and treat it like you would any other beer. You don't have to hop it. I have to hop it legally to call it beer. My license says I actually have to add hops.
It's sort of like 1 pound.
Gotta say like one out.
Exactly. Yep.
Just sprinkle dust.
Flanders Red has 3 IBUs.
Salty.
Put a video up and you'll get it.
Yeah. Kettle souring is nice because if you produce sour wort, so you can make a sour beer without infecting the rest of your equipment, and then you could make like a sour IPA, sour pale ale, which you normally wouldn't be able to do because of all the hops that would go into it under different production methods. So we'll go step by step through this. It's pretty self-explanatory, but I'll go through it. If you guys have any specific questions, feel free to ask. So you mash and water normally, like you normally would, into the kettle. Then you start heating the wort. You can hold it, bring it up to 185 for 30 minutes to pasteurize it. I actually prefer to bring mine up to a boil for about 10 minutes just because I'm paranoid. And the reason why we do that is because we are killing whatever lactic acid or wild bugs might be on or in the wort from the grain as it came from the maltster. So, have you guys ever not cleaned your mash tun and left it outside for like 24 hours? And when you came back, it smelled like death?
I made my mistake.
Yeah. That's because of wild bacteria on the grain. I've done it before, and it's come out. And it smells like either shit. Yep, like you said. Pardon me.
It tasted
or
good, but it smelled
vomit.
like shit.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I left the grain in the. It was the old school version I was doing. I left it I left it for 2 days outside of rain, and I was like, oh, let me see if I can reuse the grain to make a beer from it because there was so much grain.
We left green in there.
It tastes good, but it smelled like.
Yeah. I wouldn't do that.
Called it mixed steak.
So the reason why
Oh, it was horrible.
the reason why we have that initial boil is to kill any bacteria that would cause those off flavors. But there are some traditional styles, like I think like real traditional Lambic brewing in Germany, they count on that bacteria. Like they don't actually pitch lactic acid or lactobacillus. They count on whatever wild lacto is just on the grain. I've tried doing that at least 3 times, and it's never worked. I always it just turns gross and funky. Yeah, it's never worked. So after you bring it to a boil, cool it down to about 120 degrees. I like to purge it with CO2 at that point, just to get all the oxygen out of it. The bacteria does better in an anaerobic environment. Lactobacillus does. I then pitch my lactic acid blend in the kettle.
How do you purge CO2 in the kettle?
So it's easy for me to do because I have a plate chiller, and I have mine set up so like where normally I would oxygenate, I just pump CO2 in instead.
Okay.
If you guys have a like a stone or something that you could that you'd normally use to oxygenate your beer, if you have a way of hooking that up to CO2 instead, you can do it that way. You don't have to do it.
Plate chiller still looks the same as counterflow.
Yeah. It depends on how yours is set up. Mine's set up with a T with an oxygenation stone on it coming off a sight glass. I realize it's a lot easier for me to do because I have a lot more specialized equipment than you guys do. So.
You can use a ball out.
Yeah.
You have a full point ball out on your kettle.
Yep. You can do it that way as well.
Okay.
So just kind of do what you can. It's nice to do it. You don't necessarily have to do it. The Omega blend, I've not done it, and it's come out fine. So
could you totally like simulate a Flanders Red by putting oxygen in instead? Like if you put like sherry cubes in there, could you simulate one?
Probably. Although what I did with mine to simulate that was I just used a plastic bucket.
Okay.
Because I used a plastic bucket with oak spirals, so I got the oak character from the spirals, and then the oxidation came from the porous bucket.
Okay.
Yeah, and then just time. It just takes a long time. And I honestly still don't know if that worked really, really well because I haven't tasted it. So that could have not worked at all.
Yeah.
We'll see. So yeah, you pitch your lactic acid, and then you want to blanket your wort with CO2. So you do need. It does really help to have a way of. It's nice to have a CO2 tank if you're brewing sour beers, even if you're not kegging. Just for this reason, for kettle souring. And then I set the kettle to 110 degrees and to hold the temperature. Like I said, if you can't do that, you can still make good sour beer if you use the proper strain. So I swear I'm not getting paid by Omega, but the blend does work the best. It's the cleanest, it has the widest range of temperature, and it doesn't produce THP or any off flavors.
How tightly do you need to seal aluminum foil and clamp it down?
So we put the lid down on ours, and then we seal it with saran wrap.
Okay.
So I wonder if you have like a keg you don't use, could you technically like use a keg you're not using, just put it in like a fridge, put a heater in there, set to 120, and just put CO2 on the output, like to go ahead and put
so
it out, and then put the blank on there as well too.
You sure could. You could use keg.
So,
Yeah.
That'd work.
And the lactic shouldn't produce a lot of trub or anything like that. So as long as you can like cleanly transfer your wort in there, you should be able to get almost all the liquid back out that would be usable. Yep.
You don't have to sanitize it either.
Yeah. And they're nice brew days too because they're like half brew days. Like you're just like water, bring it up to the boil, cool down, and then it's done. You know.
until the next day when you have it again. And then,
You gotta be able to come back to it.
It's half and half, right?
Yeah. It's 2 half days of brew.
Yeah. Much easier.
Yeah. So after 24 hours, you want to test the pH every 12 hours until you kind of reach the pH that you're looking for. 3.24 to 3.28, that's where most of mine seem to hit. The pH scale is logarithmic, so that doesn't sound like there's a big difference in sourness between there, but there definitely is. So like the difference between 3 and 4 is like a 10-fold difference. Then you want to do a sensory test. You actually want to taste it. I've read online that like, oh, you don't want to taste your soured wort. I don't understand that at all, because you co-pitch. Like, there's probably wild live lacto in the Duchess. There's nothing wrong with drinking live lacto as long as you actually know what it is. You know what I mean? What I do is I then collect a 5-gallon bucket of the soured wort that still has the live lacto in it. I use that to inoculate my next batch. On the homebrew scale, I have a gallon there. A gallon still seems like a lot. You could probably get away with a liter or two, just collecting that much to produce or to go into your next batch.
So when and what pH would the lacto deactivator start killing itself? Would it just keep dropping down to like 2.9, or would it?
Well, so mine will get all the way down. The lowest I've ever gotten was 3.25.
Okay.
Yeah.
How long can you save that gap?
I've gone as long as about 6 weeks. And that's just because of how our brew schedule works. I don't know. You could probably go longer. Huh?
Put on the refrigerator?
Yeah. Yeah, I would put it in like a mason jar or something like that, and then not super tightly close it. You want to be able to let it breathe a little bit. And then, you know, if you really do need to propagate it, if you're worried about it not being alive anymore, make a starter. Although it's kind of hard to tell, really, you have to give it the taste test.
So if the lacto dies off at around 3.25, so I don't have a pH meter.
Yeah.
So could I theoretically just give it a day or two, as long as it tastes good, I can just assume that it's fine and then move on?
Yeah, I mean, pH meters are kind of the ones that are like the strips are terrible.
Yeah.
They don't really work that well.
Seems like you need to spend like at least $100 to get it.
Yeah.
pH meter for like 20 bucks.
You can,
Yeah, but I've heard those aren't too reliable.
You can get a
That's
good.
the one I use last
You can get a good beer pH meter from Hannah.
If you think you're going to make a lot of sour beers, it does pay for you.
I have one.
It pays for you to invest in a decent
matter
one.
of fact,
Hannah makes a good one for about $100. Might be
I have
120.
that
Yeah,
I have that
it's a
one.
good
I
one.
like it. I like it. I still need to do it.
All you need is the holding solution.
Okay.
So the probe, it's a titanium probe. It lasts forever. We have the really nice one, but also has temperature. You don't really need that. As long as you can keep the probe wet and keep the holding solution in there, and you got to check it periodically, it should last
No
forever.
calibration.
They usually come with a calibration solution. They come pre-calibrated. If you think they're getting out of whack, then you can calibrate them. But for the most part, they're usually fine.
Is there an issue with diluting if you've gone too low?
What do you mean?
Like diluting the wort? It's say you hit like 3.25, but you wanted to hit like 3.75. Could you dilute the wort out with
Probably.
water?
Yeah,
To-
I've never done that.
No.
I've had them just kind of get to where they go. Like,
Okay.
I'll taste it. It's in the range I want it to. I just let it ride. Yeah. If you are co-pitching, that's one of the reasons why I use 05 is because like lacto, as I said, it can sour very quickly. But 05 it'll ferment fast enough to where it's not inhibited by the sourness of the lacto. Some of them, like we did a trial. I made like a 15-gallon batch. We used 05. I think I used English Ale 04, and I used Saison yeast. And I was expecting the Saison yeast to make like some really interesting characters, but it actually threw off a ton of sulfur. Yeah, and I think it's because it was just stressed out by the low pH.
Could you air it out to try and get rid of the sulfur?
Yeah,
in there, or-
we did.
Yeah,
Still
nothing.
didn't. Yeah, we had to dump that one. So yeah, you collect however much you're going to inoculate your next batch. Then you bring the wort back to a boil to kill the lactic acid bacteria that you added to it, the Lactobacillus. And you want to boil for at least an hour to boil off any possible DMS. And then you hop it as usual. The way I made my sour IPA, I went through this entire process, and then at the very end, I hopped it like I would an IPA. It was mostly all late edition hopping and Whirlpool, and that's how I got almost no IBUs and a lot of nice hop character.
Do you have any recommendations on what sort of hops go well with sour beer? Because I'm guessing it's only a few certain types.
Not really, man. I mean, it's pretty much anything you can think of. Yeah, we went for like a super tropical one. Like we used like Azaka, Citra, and can't remember. I think El Dorado.
I was reading a podcast and I was listening to a podcast the other day. They said you can use the oldest hop you have to refrigerator. That's like
Lambic.
That's for lambics, yeah, and we'll get into that a little. Or, I think I have a slide about that. So the other option is to co-pitch, like I said, lacto and sac together. That means the lactose stays alive in your beer, which you can be okay with or you cannot be okay with. It all depends on how much risk you want to take on. One of the benefits to this is that it means that you technically make a probiotic beer because lacto is considered probiotic.
That'll sell.
Huh?
That'll sell.
Yeah. I used to use, what we used to use is Good Belly, which you can get at Publix. And that's basically pure Lactobacillus plantarum. And it's sold at Publix as a probiotic nutrient drink.
Called?
Good Belly?
Good belly.
Yeah.
Is it in the refrigerated section?
It is, yeah. It's like next to where the yogurts are.
Didn't they have
I'll
like,
look for it just to see if I can see it.
didn't they
Yeah.
have one that had like 12 different strains in it?
I'm sorry?
Wasn't there like a multi-strain version as well too? Like 12 different.
I haven't found that one. The one I had, it was called the Good Belly Pure Shot or something like that. And it was like just Lactobacillus plantarum.
Strawberry, vanilla, fruit bottom.
I didn't see those ones. They do have different fruited ones though. Like they make a blueberry acai or acai berry. They make a mango pineapple one. So if you are planning on just using those flavors in your beer anyway, you could just buy those. Those ones come in cartons. The pure ones come in these little kind of pitchable cups. And for those ones, I would do 2 per 5-gallon batch, and that seemed to work out fine. So talking a little bit about contamination, it's like I said before, if you do choose to co-pitch, anything on the cold side of your brew is going to become contaminated with lactobacillus. So your bottling bucket, your racking can, your hose,
Even the brushes you
wand.
use to clean those hoses afterwards.
yeah, including your cleaning equipment, that'll all become infected. So what a lot of people do is they'll actually just buy a new set, and then they'll use their old set as their sour stuff.
And you
There's no way. Sorry.
Good no, go for it.
There's no way to like sanitize that extremely at some level too, but it's still a risk of infection because
Well,
It's porous. So all that plastic is porous. So and lactobacillus is a bacteria, and it's very, very tiny. If you look at the size of the actual, not the molecule, but the size of the cell comparing to yeast, it's like 100 times smaller.
If you boil it,
Yeah.
free bacteria or no?
Nope. I mean, you can't really boil most plastics. You know what I mean? It'll just melt. It's really
Stainless.
No.
stainless. So
Star Saying won't
most brewing
Star
equipment
Sand.
still has like plastic or rubber gaskets in it.
yeah.
And that stuff will be
That's
contaminated.
But you can boil it for a short period of time without it actually
It's only why they use like tricline.
Yeah.
deforming.
That's so.
But I don't know if
I
that's
have a set of
Like
sour
the silicone hoses, we use those all in the brew house because we can boil those.
live
Yeah.
live bread.
So
those
Makes
won't
sense.
contain.
Okay.
right.
I answered that question.
It's just easier, and to me, it's more peace of mind just to buy it.
Yeah.
Like spend the extra like $30 and buy
It's
another
not
set of
expensive
equipment.
to not
Yeah.
mess up your stuff.
Yeah, it's not that bad. And you get a new set of brewing equipment for your clean beer.
Yeah.
Just make sure you label everything properly.
Yeah.
You want to mix everything up.
Yeah,
So,
I've either.
But then you might actually get a funky, awesome beer by messing shit up.
Yeah.
Well,
They've done
where
sours
on
that
mine,
I know.
Sorry,
like
stouts.
wide or
Sour
something
stouts.
that
You
you
can-
can see. It's
sometimes
written on
the
it,
biggest
but
mistakes
most of my stuff I
sometimes
have
can be
red
makes you
electrical
order.
tape wrapped around all the handles and around
Yeah.
everything
And then
else.
trying to do it again.
Yeah, red tape is a good way of doing it. Sharpie, I find a lot of times just kind of wears off with sanitizer and stuff like that. So, like Ed said, I actually prefer to put tape on things.
That's what I
Yeah.
No, the Sharpie's on like the lid. I'm not
Label
going
maker.
to wash that down.
Yeah.
But stainless is okay with like Star Sand as long as you replace all the O-rings.
I would still, if you're really trying to sanitize it, use it with like high temperature water
Okay.
as well. Like put boiling water in there.
It's stainless with water boiling.
Yeah, boiling water and PBW or something.
Yeah.
Okay.
that's what we do
The
here.
gaskets are they're pretty cheap, so you can just
Acid-based sanitizers, yeah, probably not gonna
about
kill
80
the
cents a
sour
piece
bacteria.
usually.
Acid tolerant anyway.
Yeah. So yeah, usually heat is your best method for killing. Anything above 180 degrees for at least
Or
I'd say
cold.
10 minutes. Cold doesn't work.
If you below 32 degrees, It kills everything. So that makes
I wouldn't
sushi
risk
grade
it.
tuna.
No, once you
But
warm
the
back
stuff
up,
that
it
makes
comes
sushi
back to
grade
life.
stuff.
Yeah.
It has to be under a certain temperature for a certain amount of time. It kills every bacteria. No.
It's plus parasites it's killing when you do the sushi.
Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's parasites. Bacteria that's holding all that.
That's
So we
a
go crazy.
that's a debate for another time. I
Get some liquid in their shit.
They go
Dump it in
dormant.
there. Then
have a degree in hematology. But I don't eat sushi.
Let's
It's-
wait
it's
a year and try my
something
Flanders Red.
It's always wrong fish too.
Kind of like
Yeah.
demolition.
Exactly. Which is, I'm hoping that
Paranoid.
Yeah.
And the aspect, so the Brett is the one that could get infectious if it's airborne. I think is in that regard.
Red does spore, yeah.
The lacto is not airborne in that regard.
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Yeah. They're all in the air all the
Yeah.
time
Anyway, so yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. With as a safety. Yeah. Okay.
Yes. They're all everywhere all the time. All right.
I do love Taco Bell though. It was so funny that they made.
So I'm talking now about sour beers in the USA. And like I said before, we are extremists. At least we tend to be in our brewing. We like to brew, majority of the time, contemporary versions of classic styles. Non-traditional, but that's not a bad thing. You know, I love pastry sours and all that stuff. Brett Pale Ales and Brett IPAs don't exist really anywhere else in the world other than here in the United States. At least originally. I'm sure they've made their way to other places now, but those all started in the good old US of A. So, yeah.
Yay. America.
Yeah, America. This is America. That's America.
Bananas and stuff.
The Florida Weisse is kind of a unique, I guess, kind of thing. I've had a hard time finding a traditional definition of, or an actual definition of what a Florida Weisse is. I feel like it's just a Berliner Weisse or a Goza that has a lot of the tropical fruits that are normally associated with subtropical environments. So,
Florida.
yeah, in Florida. And also vegetables. I did make a beet. I made a beet Berliner Weisse
Good God.
that,
Gotta try cauliflower.
oh gosh,
Just kidding.
That's how I
it's like
react.
broccoli that died.
There is a good amount of sugar in there too. I didn't
It
realize.
smells amazing. No.
Yeah. But the beet one, it was like an intense, bright purplish color, and it tasted like beets, like dirt. You know, some people loved it. I did not like it. I personally don't like
Do an
beets.
asparagus Weiss.
You are a brave man.
Oh man.
I've used cucumbers before.
Very nice.
Yeah, cucumber saisons are good. So like I said, if you guys can make a good recipe, have a unique idea, by all means make it. The main message I had for this presentation was to get people to brew more sour beers. I feel like a lot of people are intimidated by them. It's really not that bad. You're just essentially using different bacteria and or different yeast and different bacteria. As long as you understand what you're doing and you have your protocols down, there's no reason why you can't make good sour beer.
I just haven't developed a palate yet.
Yeah, that's fine. I mean, if you don't like them, you don't like them.
No, it's not that I don't
But
like
you're
them,
curious
it's
when
just
you're
like-
here.
I think there's stages that you get into, and I haven't gotten to the sour stage, but I want to learn.
Yeah.
Just so when I do, I'm just like, got this.
Yeah. You're here watching this presentation, so you got a little bit of an interest in it, right?
No, I do, because I'm eventually, you know, it's like I'd like to have a rocket pack. So this is like my new. I'm eventually gonna get into sour beer.
Yeah.
Where it's my thing. So we'll see.
We have more beer to drink. I do have a uniquely American style of sour beer that will bust out right now.
And I do like it. I just don't know if I can.
And I'll bring a Berliner Weiss.
You.
Yes, this is Berliner Weiss.
Like we have options down here.
I was nervous as hell.
Well, when I started drinking beer, it was about maybe.
I didn't touch it.
I started getting into beer maybe 6 years ago, 5 years ago. Otherwise, I was more of a drinker, like liquor,
Same boat.
and beer wasn't really like a good. It was just drinkable just to get a reaction.
It had barley. So there's probably some
See,
material in there.
and then I started with the light.
We'll see.
Never
Right now, the
started really
Berliner
with
Weiss has
I do like
before I
It's really
think
good.
Oh man.
I just would like to be able to make one. Yeah.
Yeah, I
With
went
a higher percentage.
I mean, you're right. No, yeah, because it's expensive too for the 2.5% it is. I usually have actually right now like grapefruit, it's spiked with vodka in my fridge, and so I actually
You just
keep
take a
that.
Schopenhauer and spike it a little.
Yep, that's what I do.
It is. I mean, it's not always, but it has.
Look all summer you'll find it.
Okay, I'll have to keep an eye out.
I mean, you're drinking essentially like soda.
Less than say 6
That means it's
They wouldn't never give me a buzz. I have such a high tolerance.
They have a ton of them.
But it's not something you research. It's not something that someone has technically been successfully I've read a lot of things. I've tried to do the
There's typically not enough difference between the two categories.
It's
Specialty wood age beer and wood age.
But to blend at 2.6%, I mean, unless they're doing like a 6%, and then they're blending it with just juice
Total
to dilute it.
Yeah. I mean, with the flavor that
Danny, can you make a show for offer?
How would you do?
Thank you, sir.
So that's a Radler, which is it's like a blend. I think it's soda.
Hefeweizen juice and soda.
It's a hef, right? A hef and soda, right?
It's like grapefruit.
Yeah.
It's good, but like, as much research as you do, you can't find anybody that's like been able to replicate.
Charles
Really good shot of gin.
did a here we go. Charles over at
Total
Brewers,
Recall?
he did a good Radler. He was making
More?
fruit soda. And it came out really good.
We're all
So
good
you
here.
can find a
Still
similar
low,
grapefruit.
low percentage too.
Maybe actually a little bit higher. I think about 4.
Okay.
So
It's gonna be
So,
lower end. No matter.
yeah.
So this is Total Recall. This is a Brett IPA. Actually, it's sour. There's more than just Brett in here. This is a sour IPA from Red Cypress. The former brewery formerly known as Red Cypress. We'll talk about that later.
It's good, man.
So this is a Foder fermented wild India Pale Ale.
You said fooder?
Foder, yeah.
So being that it's wild, we don't necessarily know what sort of bacteria or yeast was in there.
This doesn't really taste sour to me.
Yeah, it has
It's definitely hoppier than you would expect for it.
Yeah.
It's sour.
Because it's Foder fermented, I would imagine
What I make.
there's definitely some Brett in there.
Yeah.
You can taste the Brett for sure. But this isn't necessarily a sour beer.
Don't drink the
I
cat.
would consider this more wild.
Oh yeah.
But you can see how a lot of the fruity characteristics from the Brett work really, really well with the hoppiness, right? I mean, there's like tons of pineapple.
Bread IPA myself.
Take a taste of the cat.
And then another day,
It doesn't go
I had
well.
a Saison bread from Boulevard.
Yeah, I would say Boulevard makes a common one.
That's good, man. It's really good.
Yeah. Saison yeast I feel like Brett Saisons work really, really well because there's a lot of the esters and the phenols that are produced by the Saison yeast that are then made into more fruitier versions of themselves by the Brett. It's almost like biotransformation in hops. They're transformed into isomers of themselves, which are more fruity in general. So this is I feel like you do get a little bit of tartness probably from the Brett. Like maybe I don't know if there's necessarily an oxidized quality to it, but
Yeah, definitely.
it's a little bit more bitter as well. What's up?
Talk about the diastasis at all?
Not in this. That's yeah.
I was thinking they should probably know about it. You know what I mean? They came on, they
Yeah, that's more of a recent thing. I mean, so there's a lot of that's usually a Saccharomyces thing, like a traditional brewer's yeast. Since they've been doing genetic DNA testing on everything, they figured out that there's a lot of them that have a gene that lets them also break down dextrins, very similar to how Brett does. So just to like really, really ferment stuff. The most common ones are usually Belgian strains, specifically Saison yeasts. Like I know 3787 has it, and that's how like a lot of those just get really, really, really dry. And you have to really make sure that they've completed their fermentation by the time you package them. So you have to really track your fermentations and make sure they're not changing over time. Belle Saison definitely has it. French Saison,
Yeah.
that thing, everybody says that the saying goes to that one is that it'll ferment a shoe. Like it just breaks down everything. So,
Good God.
so yeah, they tell people to treat those diastasis strains like you would Brett. You know, just keep that level of differentiation and cross-contamination. We do that in our brew house as well. Like we made one beer with it, and then we kind of nuked everything. We boiled everything off, all the hoses, and we got new hoses for it. All of our kegs got pasteurized, everything else. I mean, that's part of our normal protocol anyway. But The last thing, if you are going to make a pastry sour, which I highly recommend, I find them quite delicious, don't use bread in it because bread can also ferment lactose. So it'll just break it down and you'll lose all your body. So we're going to go a little bit now into recipe formulation for sour beers. For a lot of sour beers, it's really the characteristic of the bacteria and the yeast that determines a lot of their flavor. It's not really so much the recipe itself. The recipes are kind of standardized for the most part, and they're pretty traditional. It's a lot of the back end processing that really makes a lot of these beers unique. For the water profile, there's really generally not a lot of adjustments that you have to make, just the ones that you would normally to do your normal wort production. You know, you want to make sure your pH is in range, that you get conversion and things like that. You don't want to go too extreme on your mineral additions because a lot of these beers do attenuate out so dry that you could get like kind of a chalky or a minerally quality in the finished beer. And then obviously you want to use anything that's low or non-existent in chlorine and chloramine, just like how you would your normal brewing water. So for grain and grist, generally you want to avoid high gravity recipes just because they do get so highly attenuated and they just get so dry. That being said, I've had some really, really good high gravity sour beers. Kador made one that was like 14% alcohol.
Good God.
Yeah, made a Brett Saison, and he hated it. He was going to dump it, but I told him, this is fantastic. Give me all that you have. Don't throw it away.
All your beer are belong to me.
Yeah, exactly.
Everybody has different palates.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. To me, it wasn't too like harsh or alcoholic or anything. Any base grain can be used in general. Pilsner is the most common and the most traditional. It's not that much more expensive than Turo, although I've definitely made some good ones at Turo anyway. Like because you're going to get all those other flavors on the back end, you don't really get that much of a grain quality to it. You just want to make sure you avoid anything that's like really harsh. So I wouldn't use any like roasted barley or chocolate malt or anything like that. If you are going to make like an Ode Brune or something like that, which I'll show you the typical formulation for that later.
What base malt were you just talking about?
I was talking about Pilsner as a base malt as being more traditional. I was just saying to avoid a lot of the high Lovabond specialty grains, like roasted barley.
I have had a couple of
yeah,
really
but
good
not for that.
dark sours that would use some really heavy roast flavors.
Yeah, I'm saying like just in general, because they do attenuate so dry, like it's easy for them to become like acrid, kind of just too much. But like if you can like blend them back with a less sour beer, it probably gets rid of a lot of that.
Well, I know Candiana at one point for Swansea Day did a soured stout using their lambic process.
Really?
And it was really good.
Yeah,
Interesting as hell.
That sounds good. I've never tried that, but I would like to. That'd be interesting to do. Wheat is used for body and head retention. A lot of beers are equal parts, usually 50-50 wheat and Pilsner or around there. Oats are used for body and texture. Chit and or spelt malt are used for head retention and foam stability. That is one of the problems for a lot of sour beers is a lack of head retention. That has to do with the lactobacillus breaking down the proteins. So to kind of compensate for that, you use a lot of your unmodified, higher protein grains. 6-row would probably do that too. You asked about 6-row. I've personally never done that, but it would probably work. So Berliner Weiss are anywhere from 30 to 70% wheat and 30 to 70% Pilsner. Mine is like 60-40 Pilsner to wheat. That's mostly really because of the system that I have. We have a lot of problems lautering on ours. It's really easy to get a stuck sparge on mine. So I tend to go more heavy on the barley because it has a husk. You could also add rice hulls. Yeah, and we do that too sometimes. Lambic is kind of unique because it uses raw wheat in Pilsner. The raw wheat is done because they want to. There's also a special malting process that goes along with making lambics. It's called a turbid mash. That's right. The combination of the turbid mash and the raw wheat leaves a lot of dextrins in the dextrins or long chain sugars in the wort, which are unfermentable by the yeast or unfermented by the Saccharomyces, but then the Brett then has something to chew on and create a lot of its character as time goes on.
Red and primary ended up at 10-12 in primary, but it was still very sweet. And I did a turbid mash just because I knew I was going to put bread in it when I put it in
Yeah.
the barrel.
So that'll probably dry out
2.5 hour
too.
mash.
Yeah. Yeah, turbid mashes are not fun. It's like a variation of a what's the other one? The other traditional German mash.
Decoction?
Yeah, it's like a decoction mash. Like in a decoction mash, you pull out grain and you boil it to raise the temperature. In a turbid mash, you actually pull out the wort
You pull
and you
out,
boil
pull
it
out
to raise to the next step. And that boiled percentage of wort that you're doing kills, it neutralizes all the enzymes and the dextrins in it. So then you have dextrins in that percentage of wort at the end. Flemish Reds are in 50-80% pills, and then a blend of Munich, Vienna, melanoidin, and other aromatic malts. Darker malts, like caramel malts that you would use to get that red color and more of that caramel flavor, sweetness out of it. Hops. So hops naturally inhibit the growth of lactic acid bacteria, and that's why they're usually most sour beers have less than 15 IBUs. A lot of the ones that I've made have like anywhere from 5 to 0. Lambics traditionally use aged hops, and that's because aging the hops reduces the alpha acids. So they get the flavor, the earthiness from the hops, but none of the IBUs. And they get cheesy. I don't know if you guys have ever smelled or come across aged hops. They don't smell very good. They almost have like this kind of tea quality to them at the end. Like they don't really taste like hops anymore. They get cheesy and they have like almost like a green tea thing going. Kettle Sour beers can have any amount of hops you want, and that's kind of another one of the unique things and interesting things about kettle souring a beer. You can make a kettle soured IPA. Because you've already soured the wort, you can hop the hell out of it at the end and still get a good beer. Dry hopping your sour beers, like what we're drinking right now. This is technically, like I said, a wild ale, but
That's why.
yeah, it's very hoppy. This is a wild IPA, so it's hoppy and it's got a lot of Brett character too. I really enjoy this. You guys liking this?
I do.
See, this is the one I'd give you. I'd give you this batch.
Yeah, you don't like this one? It's okay. Not everybody has to like them all.
Everyone has different taste buds.
Exactly.
So
I'm surprised it's not more sour too originally. Like it's right in the initial like part of the tongue, and it falls off real quick.
it has
That's
that
like the
it
hop
has
character.
that dry grapefruit needing some sugar on it.
Yeah.
Like a sugar rim, a ligament drink. Perfect.
You like it sweeter? You probably really like.
But that's not sour.
There's some get some Lindemann's Framboise or Creek. Like it's a lambic. It's sour, but it's been
I
sweetened.
like the sours you made,
Thank you.
but this one has a drier characteristic on the back end.
Yeah, you just might not like Brett. Like Jeremy hates Brett. He likes like Gozas and Berliner Weisses, like the fruited ones that I make, but he does not like Brett
I'm
at all.
not skilled enough to know exactly every beer that I drink if it's Brett or not Brett. That's the thing.
I mean, you see how this one has like that kind of like funky character to it?
Yes.
That's Brett.
But I mean, they can't all be like that.
Yeah.
I had a.
There must be different characteristics of Brett.
Well, like the first one we had, the Jolly Quencher,
Yeah.
that one was tart, like it was sour,
Yeah.
but there's no bread.
Okay.
I mean, so like,
So what is the Brett actually? I remember. But what is the Brett doing besides the funky? Why is it not finishing?
Well, it's highly tannic, it's making it a lot drier.
It is right.
Yeah.
So the Brett's killing off everything that
It's any sugar that's there is basically going.
can't.
yeah, it takes a long time to do it too.
eats
But it
remaining.
produces a lot of complex flavors, which you don't necessarily have to like.
But it
Some people
varies
like it,
between
some
the
people
same between the same person.
Yeah, and different strains too. Like I said, there's some that are like super tropical. There's some that are real funky and like barnyard. I have another beer for us to try.
Oh boy.
I've never had actually a horse blanket, but that's.
It's an acquired taste.
I was raised in
It literally is an acquired taste.
Yeah, Brett's an acquired taste.
I get
like that. That's that profile. You can just like almost smell.
But just
like
because it's not good to me now doesn't mean that.
Like you're into the farmhouse
If I
with
try
horses
that
and
in
you're like,
2
what the
years,
fuck am I
I'll
doing?
down, like,
Yeah. Oh wait, this is not
You don't
too
like
bad.
it? Why don't you like it?
No, this is horrible.
There's a little bit of Total Recall if anybody wants it.
Yes.
I'm curious as well too. So I've seen for the Kettle Sour, they have.
Oh, sorry.
You're good. You're good.
Thank you, Dan.
I keep seeing like using Instapot. Now, is that for making like the starter for
Kettle Sour?
Yeah. Because like,
I would imagine so, because or else that'd be like a really small
yeah,
batch.
that's what I was thinking too.
Yeah.
So I keep seeing it over there.
Isn't there an issue with using the Instapot? Because
I brought that up from last time when we were making the wort starter.
Yeah.
Sorry, it doesn't hit the 15 psi to kill. What's the thing that botulism? There we go.
yeah, it's important. Let's not die from it.
Yeah, so you can get it's probably the 12 psi, but it can be 15, which brings you about 246 degrees, 1 point of water, which will kill botulism. But what you can do, I heard, is you can. I think
With the regards of total recall,
in the Instant Pot,
there seems to be more breadth than lacto percent.
Yeah, like I don't really taste much sourness in this beer at all.
This one, the last just a little bit, and I took a sip.
I'd like to get the
really
equivalent to
tastes the bread when it warms up.
Yeah. Sours are easy.
Another cool thing for a lot of sour beers is that you could actually like use the dregs. Like if you like how this came out, there's yeast in the bottom of this bottle. You know? Yeah,
You have to dry it to try to salvage it.
No, you could just like if you had a sour batch going already that was like just doing its thing. You could open it up and
Oh shit!
swirl them up and dump them in there.
Nice.
So I
Okay.
don't need
Yeah, a lot of people like seek out
if I'm using it.
bottled sour beers specifically because they want particular quality in their beer.
Another point about you can buy the mixed yeast like Rosalaire blend.
Initially, but if you're
Don't make a starter.
Yeah, because you want to understand.
Because, well, when you make a starter,
was if you want to bulk
some of the yeasts, they don't all
That's
produce
when you
and
go for
reproduce
that.
at the same rate.
and for me,
You no longer
I
end up
can't
with the same
recognize it's
proportions
Yeah.
for each type of
I
bud.
couldn't get 15, so instead of actually keeping it out in the
So
open,
if you
like
need
a
more than
pantry,
one
I
container,
froze all mine.
pitch 2.
And so that way nothing can grow.
So there's one thing with like sour brewing. I feel like it's a lot more brewing by feel
So,
as opposed to like technical brewing, like clean beer,
but
like
the
clean
starters
brewing can be.
definitely are good because it's nice to.
And that I think is interesting. It's
It's
a lot more. It's a lot more of like see what happens and see what you get as opposed to trying to predict.
My thing right now, my big deficit
Repeatable. We
is
don't expect it to be exactly.
Yeah. Part of the beauty in something is that it is fleeting. You know, like I've got to really cherish this.
So
I
there's
might not
always
ever get it
something-
the
The
exact
beauty
same
and the
way.
chaos of
Yeah,
all
this is
that
fleeting.
happening
I'm
on.
still worried that in a year I'm going to find out that I have a
So I
spoiled
need
beer.
to-
Yeah, that happens too.
That's fine as well too.
I think my next burger just
All right.
Oh,
I have no idea what.
So I'm actually working with that one right now because the missus went through and she was
Almost
dishes
done.
and she actually tapped it with like glass and caused my hydraulic to shatter. So the last one I brewed out hydraulic. It's like here's beer.
I'm only 6 in, so it just hasn't been important by.
I want it. And I'm actually not yet. No, I'm debating getting one, but I don't know. It's the $40 cost versus like the $7. It's easier.
That is a horrible smell and taste.
Oh
I don't know
yeah,
if it's going to help.
The only time you're ever going to use the one is
it does
in the
happen.
beginning. In the beginning.
How does
You can't use it
oxidation cause
once
that?
it's fermented. You can't.
It's a chemical reaction that the yeast has.
Oh really?
Yeah.
That's just because oxidation whenever it's like that wet cardboard, musty.
Yeah.
I didn't know it actually did that as well.
Has to be used because
It does with bread.
Okay.
And like
Oh,
with,
okay.
consumption of sugar.
Good to know.
bread always makes.
How about the
Funky.
I keep
Yeah.
saying the tilts.
There's no saying Saccharomyces is like a dog,
You'll be like,
predictable.
man, I got a 12% beer.
Brettanomyces is like a cat.
Doesn't work that way.
You don't really know what it's gonna do. You just gotta let it do its thing. You can't make it come to you.
Be nice to it and hopefully it'll be nice back.
Exactly.
Put it down every single
Sac is like a dog. Bread is like a cat.
It's going to be like a 13, 14.
Love it.
Got it down to like one.
You can't make it do anything.
No, you cannot.
Just hope it does what you want.
Clark, if you get to hold your leg, just let it spit.
Yeah, just.
I wasn't intending to do that way.
You got a little bit
When I
of
first started out, I bought extract kits. When I first started out,
Okay. How many 3-point-something pounds of extracts did you use?
I use a lot of extract, but I also went through and I'm like, well, I wonder if the recipe only had about 4 or 5
And I poured that in with
pounds of Mars.
Sir?
Sugar?
because unlike Danny, I don't have glass marbles that I trust to throw in the bottom.
And I was reading about
That's
that.
another option.
I'm still finish up right now. I just want to get the keg
But the
going.
only place I find glass marbles
But
There we get one?
Yeah, I realized. I read
places like that.
The
And that's
untrust forms as much
flour.
anymore.
You have to use, there's
I don't know
Tomahawk
that
or
that has
it's a
no
distillery.
red or anything like that. I
They
don't
use
know what
sugar
the
per
last
alcohol ratio. So I think it's
Exactly. I was actually looking at that.
That's what Brett said. So this is actually another example of a wild ale, but you can also get the characteristic Brett flavors in there. This is wild sage, or crooked stave.
much better than last.
That's why there's an herbal.
I'll put the cans out there.
Oh, it's Colorado.
I want
Oh, I
to
had fun in Denver.
I don't even.
You know, I talked to you like a week before I flew out to Denver.
I've gone to Boulder a few times. This was Avery Brewery was really good.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this was
You can throw a rock and hit a good brewery in Colorado.
five years ago.
My
Where do I go? Oh, let me just take a step here.
So this is another wild ale, but this one, instead of being heavily dry hopped like the Total Recall was, this one has a lot of sage and lemongrass in it, which I feel like complement
Navajo.
the character of the bread pretty well.
I thought about that.
They went absolutely
Man's
bananas.
foot.
I actually called the distributor.
It's a nice, yeah, no.
The bread character on this one I feel like is a little bit lower.
Could that be because of the lemongrass
pulled
and
it-
sage?
they pulled it
brings
soon?
it down a
It's
bit.
possible, or I mean, they could have blended it with like another base beer or something like that. There's a lot of different ways.
They
you can do
chilled
it.
it too soon.
I used stainless steel.
Now, will it continue to sour if you drop temperature?
I probably it'll just take a lot longer. Like how much of a drop? Are you talking about like crashes?
Yeah.
Probably not.
So it won't have. So the flavors won't change once you crash it.
Below like 50 degrees,
Okay.
both lacto and PDO are both inhibited.
Done.
I thought
Yeah.
about
The Brett might still do some stuff, but
but if you
it'll be
do
super
that,
slow.
it's got to drain back in.
So you won't notice the difference.
Right. Yeah. Most of these beers,
I leave the
once they've gone through the majority of their primary fermentation, you can then keep them at around room temp.
Does anything
Just
do
trying not to let them get too warm.
anything do any work below 45 degrees?
Lager yeast. Yeah.
So lazy.
So, forgive me, Danny. We're talking Fahrenheit, right? Not
Yes.
Celsius. Okay.
Yeah. I only talk about
Okay.
Leave it to the jury to like be on top of it.
We'll be around forever.
So, for the vinegar on flavor wise, what if we wanted, was the PDO, was that the one that had
I'm surprised nobody's.
the acetic acid generation? Like, what if we wanted to
No one
generate
lives
that?
in Antarctica.
That's Brett mostly.
Right, okay.
But I think I can't remember now. I know it's mostly associated with Brettanomyces, and it's like oxidation in bread. When you make a bread starter, they actually tell you not to use a stir bar because it'll just create a shitload of acetic acid. And things like,
But if we want to stir bar,
if you want to, you can. Yeah,
because like so for me, I love vinegar,
me too.
and like kombucha also has got that acetic aspect too as well.
Yep.
So nice to actually put that in your beer. So
Yeah, I mean, I used to make kombucha a lot when I was young. I haven't really done it in a while, but like I feel like it'd be interesting to like throw some bread into a kombucha SCOBY and just see what happens.
so we actually came down here.
I almost
Yeah.
You have a scheduling problem.
So talking about off flavors, not all sour beers are good sour beers. There are definitely off flavors that you can get. One of the most common ones is vinegar. It's that acetic acid character. Like I said before, there's really only one or two styles where that's actually accepted if you're going by a judging, classic category.
So appearance has nothing to do with.
Nah, I wouldn't say so. And that's mostly due to acetobacteria, acetobacter, which is carried a lot by fruit flies. In order for the production, it does require ethanol and oxygen to produce. So you also have to have oxygen in it as well. When you're making your sour beers, there's a lot of a lot of people want to like open them up and try them out periodically, but every time you do that, you're running the risk of introducing oxygen. So kind of try to resist that as much as you possibly can. Don't let your airlocks go dry. That's also another way to introduce oxygen and fruit flies. So if you are going to long age some sour beers, use the S-shaped airlocks. Those don't evaporate nearly as fast as the
I
other
think it's
ones.
stuck at the very bottom. The fruit flies get stuck.
Yeah, exactly. They're doing their job.
Bastards.
So ethyl acetate is the other more common off flavor associated with sour beers. And that's that nail polish smell. I haven't really gotten it in any of the beers that we've drank so far today.
Which is good.
Is it ethyl acetate?
Yeah.
Yep.
So it's acetone.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, it's similar to acetone.
So that's a non good quality beer.
Yeah, you don't want that in your beer.
Really?
Yeah.
What if I like
want to be in a hair
It'll shut down your liver.
Do you like doing the nails?
If you like it, go ahead and pour it in there.
That's also created by another acetobacter
cleans out your bowels.
due to oxidation. Using plastic buckets is another way of introducing oxygen to your beers. Like I said, unless you're really trying to brew a Flanders Red, don't use plastic buckets.
What if you're doing like a Lambic though, where it's gone through like a year and a half, 2-year aging time? Would a plastic bucket be acceptable for a
I would.
for that?
I would use glass
Yeah.
or stainless steel. Yeah, and even like if you do have a stainless steel vessel and you want to get that oak character to it, you could always use oak cubes or oak spirals. Because like there is a chemical interaction between the Brett and the cellulose and the wood that is happening. So you do need to have that contact with wood for it to get the characteristic
There's
flavor.
actually a little bit
no
difference
fiberglass.
between regular Saccharomyces and the wood.
Yeah, I believe it.
Carbon fiber.
Like the first time I put beer in a brand new barrel, I have to put a lock on it because it will ferment in the barrel.
Yeah.
It will start fermenting again. It won't for long, only a day or so.
That was probably a Diastaticus yeast. Like ones that's capable of breaking down the longer chain reactions.
But it only did it for a couple of days, but I was like, why is my barrel leaking? And then I went and pulled the plug and it went pop.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh shit.
When we transferred our beers into our barrels, they off-gassed for a good 2 days afterwards.
Yeah.
That's because we had them. It was a cold cracked beer that we moved into them. So as they were warming up and coming up to temp, they were off-gassing. So that's another possibility, just temperature change. Sulfur is also a terrible off flavor in beer. It's one that's hard to get rid of. A lot of times it'll kind of disappear with just aging. That comes from low nitrogen content. So a lot of times that's low free amino nitrogen or FAN in your beer.
Can you introduce that to remove it or no?
You can, yeah. Yeast nutrient has diammonium phosphate.
But you can't actually infuse it with nitrogen.
No, I wouldn't do it that way. I mean, air is like what 80% nitrogen, but you don't want to oxidize.
I mean,
also, nitrogen isn't nearly as soluble as say CO2.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's why
it takes a lot more time to infuse in liquid.
Yeah, that's why stats on like beer gas and it's heavy amounts of nitrogen. The texture comes from the nitrogen coming right out of it.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
It's actually the off-gassing that gives it
I was just
the
confused.
texture.
I mean, not because I have a nitrogen tank, just because.
Yeah, I wouldn't do it that way. I would just add some yeast nutrient to it. That's soluble nitrogen. You know, it's like quickly going to infuse directly into the beer.
Gotcha.
So is that good for almost any style to try? To like put the yeast nutrient into it? Because I advise as well too, the high sulfur content.
I recommend adding yeast nutrient to all of your beers. And so it's just cheap insurance.
Yeah.
You know, just throw a couple teaspoons in there, especially your high gravity beers. Yeah. Sulfur also frequently happens when you fruit a beer because it kicks off a secondary fermentation, and a lot of times the nitrogen is already depleted from the first fermentation. So just add a little bit of nutrient in there. Butyric acid is terrible. Have you ever come across it in the beer?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yeah.
Get that vomit or bile smell. And that's unwanted anaerobic bacteria. So that's usually always done by contamination.
Drink that whole damn lemon.
And like I said,
I didn't feel good about it either.
Yeah. It's out of spite.
So the majority of the beer is contaminated in a sense with bacteria. How is this getting introduced?
It could be anything. I mean, improper sanitation, airlocks, permeation from just the barrel. Sour and Brett will actually jump from barrel to barrel. I've heard of it happening because they spore, they go into the air.
Okay.
That's why, like, if you look at all the most barrel racks, they're not actually touching each other. There's a little bit of a gap there.
Yeah, they are.
Because if the wood actually touches, it can jump.
Interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
So it's not airborne sporing, it's just contact sporing.
It could be also airborne sporing, though.
Okay.
Yeah. So anytime you're doing anything barrel aged, expect to lose about 25% of your barrels to contamination. That's just something you have to deal with. If you ever you know, most of you guys are not going to open a brewery and start a large barrel sour program. But this is what people who do. They just accept the fact that up to like 25% of their barrels are just going to become unusable.
So if this takes over, there's no coming back.
Is the barrel destroyed at that point?
Yes. Yeah, the barrel's useless.
So that's why after so
cut it in half and turn it into a planter. Yeah.
Because I've seen a lot of breweries selling the barrels, so they only have a certain lifetime of usage before it becomes unusable.
Right.
Yeah.
So I wonder, could you technically reuse? So like for whiskey, for example, they burn those barrels. Could you try and use a similar thing, like smoked beer that way, with like going through just torching the inside of the barrel? Or
it's, I mean, there's no guarantee that you're going to kill everything. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Whiskey production is kind of unique, especially like bourbon.
Yeah.
Bourbon is the official liquor of the United States of America, and it has like a designated definition of what it has to be. Like it has to be at least 51% corn. It has to be used in first use only charred American oak barrels. It has to be just aged for a certain amount of time and like have to be of a certain proof. So that's why the barrels can only be used once. That's why there's so many bourbon barrels on the market.
There's a new requirement that I think they should adapt to, and it must be stored in a rack house. It's not going to collapse. I'm getting tired of crying every night when I see stories about that.
Yeah.
Forklift hits it.
So, butyric acid and isovaleric, which we'll get to next, those are the reasons why we do that first boil in the first half of a kettle sour. It's to kill and nuke all that other stuff that just could contaminate your beer and be in the wort.
So if you boil a barrel, would kill everything?
Maybe.
Technically, but
probably.
You have to leave it in there for.
There's still porous aspects.
No, but you have to leave it in there for a certain amount of time for to get to that temp.
I've heard of people steam treating them, like pumping steam inside the barrel to try and do it, but it's still a risk. You know what I mean? There's no guarantee.
It's like, damn, I just did a whole brew.
I feel like you lose
20 grand and got contaminated.
If you're trying to boil a barrel, plus there's a lot of water to soak it all up a little too.
Yeah, you need a huge kettle for that.
Yeah.
The last one is isovaleric acid. That's like a cheesy or kind of footy smell. And that's also due to unwanted anaerobic bacteria or aerobic bacteria. Like I said before, just because the beer is sour doesn't mean it's good sour beer.
So all these off flavors that you're mentioning here are.
So you're saying just because it's beer doesn't make it good beer?
Yeah, exactly. But I feel like there's this conception that like, you know, people are like, oh, I love sour beer, but they don't know what good sour beer necessarily tastes like. Just like there's definitely off flavors that you can get in sour beer.
But there are, but have people sold these flavors that people like?
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
Okay. No, yeah.
It's
all right.
Yeah.
No. Like, just because it's not good to
I haven't
the
gone back to
brewer
it because
doesn't mean that it's not. Because I brewed a beer that I was like, whoa, and everybody's like, yeah, this is great. I'm like, I'm not making that again.
Is that you or you that were saying that you had the one at?
Yeah, so that was the thing is like when I was really like they were having like their Belgian like basically week, and I said like give me the weirdest thing you got, and that's what I ended up getting, and that actually was a really expensive bottle as well too, and that's why I drank out of spite.
Yeah.
But to
you
some
didn't like
people,
it though?
no, it tasted almost exactly like bile. But to some people that might be an acquired taste, and that's why they're still selling it and distributing it internationally. So
I saw some recent Japanese melon.
it was a rough drink. I had to taste
cantaloupe,
it.
basically. I was like, why are they buying a $200 cantaloupe?
So for more information, I would highly recommend the. Actually, let me go grab it. I'm sure you guys have probably seen it before. The American Sour Beer by Michael Tonsweiler. I actually got it before I started.
So he probably makes the worst sour beers ever.
Tonsweiler?
Yeah.
Everyone
He's made the most mistakes ever. That's how you make really good sours. Introduce all kinds of things that you don't think could actually be, and then they turn out to be what people like to do.
So this is kind of the
So this
most
guy
current
is the most
American sour
experimental person with regards to unorthodox way of making beer.
or just sour beer, wild beer. A little of everything. This book is great. I've read it 3 times.
So the Germans love the guy.
Germans don't like him very much. The Belgians love him. So I would definitely recommend that book if you guys are interested in more information on sour beer. Also, the Milk the Funk Wiki. That's like a really, really active sour beer community, sour and wild beer. There's a lot of information that is probably more up to date. I would say that's probably the most up to date source on contemporary American styles. It started out as just like a Facebook group, but then it's gone off to emerge into its own thing. And the Sour Beer blog. That's another really good source. That guy has opened his own sour brewery, as has Michael Tonsmeyer. His website is The Mad Fermentationist, and he opened.
Sapwood Cellars.
I can't remember the name of his brewery now.
Sapwood Cellars.
Sapwood Cellars. That's right. And he, along with
late to be calm.
his partner, he wrote a really good The New IPA. That's another book I would recommend. I just got that. Got hold of that one. That's all about making like new IPA styles and contemporary hazy IPAs. That's another good book. Anyway, I digress. Thank you guys for coming to my presentation.
Yeah, thank you.
Go Blue Sea Sour Beer.
I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight. Just as a reminder, we have another masterclass coming up in August sometime. It's going to be with Chris Holland from Tactical Brewing. He's going to be talking about knowing your system.
Cool.
So another one to look forward to. We're thinking like end of August, maybe early September, somewhere in that ballpark. And then we're trying to get one more for the rest of the year. So we're shooting for 5. We got 4, shooting for 5. So yeah, outside of that, we'll see you guys at the meeting coming up in a few weeks. And thanks for coming out.
Yep.
Thanks, Steve.